Charles Perrault was born Catholic in Paris, France on January 12, 1628. The talented French storyteller passed away on May 1703. He was a poet, writer, and storyteller for an adult audience. Yes, I said it. Fairy tales were written for grown ups. If we go back to Jack Sipes' Spells of Enchantment, an overview of the history of fairy tales, he opened by saying, it has generally been assumed that fairy tales were first created for children and are largely the domain of children. Nothing could be further from the truth. Fairy tales were written to provide hope in a world seemingly on the brink of catastrophe. So let's talk about fairies and how they were used by Charles Perrault. Very early in his story, Charles introduced to us 7 fairies. Keep that number in mind. These 7 fairies were found to give the princess each a gift. A gift from each fairy will make the princess perfect. Even though it was a norm for fairies to give gifts back then, we saw that there was one fairy who did not have the princess' best interest at heart. There have always been fairies. Emma Humble. So, fairies didn't start with the Tooth Fairy. Fairies have been around since the 16th century, probably even before. Now, Emma told us about fairies being everywhere: Russia, China, Germany, even here in the United States. They were human sized, they were having intimate relationship with humans, they lived in quaint huts in woods. But between 1598 and 1603, they became small, more convenient for humans to walk around with. Ask Queen Elizabeth, the first that is. She can tell you all about that. So here's a small history article on fairies talking about Madame Aulnoy and Charles Perrault. If you want, you can pause right here and take a quick read. The number 7. It's no secret in fairy tales. We see it in different fairy tales, and we saw it more than once in Charles Perrault's Sleeping Beauty in the Woods. The number 7 signifies perfection, and that is why we had 7 good fairies at the christening dinner, because if each fairy gave the princess a gift, she would be the perfect princess. Let's talk about the evil fairies. Okay, guys, let's go back and talk about fairies for a second. I know before we spoke about good fairies, but Emma Humble also said that there were bad fairies. In Charles Perrault, we saw one evil fairy, and this fairy wanted to take out our princess. Not take her out on a date, no, she wanted her dead. But these evildoers in fairy tales, actually, they make up fairy tales. Villains are one of the characteristics of a fairy tale. And in Charles Perrault, The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods, we'll see another villain later on in my presentation. So after the evildoers, we have the helpers. The ones who come in to assist the protagonist after the evildoer did their job or played their part. And in fairy tales, we usually have animal helpers. But in Charles Perrault, The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods, we saw a fair helper and we also saw a human helper. So let's look at both of these helpers individually. For the fairy helper, she got introduced at the beginning of the story where they had their christening party. And when the evil fairy came in, she was there and she was smart enough. She knew that the evil fairy was planning to put a curse on our princess. So she decided to go last. When all the other fairies were given their gifts, she decided, I'm going to go last so I can undo or I can. She said she can't fix it completely, but she could do something that so the princess doesn't die. And she waited to go last. So after the evil fairy placed her curse on our princess, she was there to kind of reverse the curse. So instead of death, it was 100 years of being asleep. And then we see the human helper, who is the chef. So the princess's mother-in-law was a ogress, which is a female version to an ogre. And we saw ogre in Shrek, and we go on and talk about Shrek and ogres after this. But the ogress, the mother-in-law, wanted to have night and day for lunch and dinner. She also wanted to have the princess. And we saw the chef went out of his way to get different animals to kind of trick the mother-in-law so she doesn't eat the princess and her kids. Okay, that's it for helpers. Now, let's go ahead and talk about our big green friend, Shrek. Yes, you, Shrek. Charles Perrault spoke about an ogress. Most of us already know of an ogre, our big green friend, Shrek. I won't cover a lot on Shrek because I'm sure Jordan already did a pretty good job on that. The ogress in our story may be related to Shrek, but her cannibalism was more prominent than our big green friends. She had an appetite for her daughter-in-law and her grandkids. Ogres, they were seen as giants, monsters, and the prince, his mom, was an ogre. And Carolyn Faye in Sleeping Beauty Must Die argues that if his mom was an ogress, didn't the prince have some type of ogre in his bloodline or in his DNA? And he knew that his mom was an ogress. Obviously, he knew because he hid his family away from his mom for a very long time. So, why would he leave his kids and his wife behind to his mom or with his mom? Shrek was also an ogre. And yes, Shrek had a weird appetite. I've seen Shrek eat some things that I wouldn't eat, but he was more of a friendly ogre. And this mother-in-law, she wasn't no Princess Fiona. And guys, the ogress in Charles Perrault's story, maybe she didn't look exactly like this picture. Remember, they were wealthy, so she probably looked something like this, because she probably could afford a personal trainer. So we're going to talk about the wealth in this story and how the wealth was shown to us, the readers. In 1697, some indicators of wealth were different than what they are today. However, some wealth indicators in 1697 can still be used as wealth indicators today. Charles Perrault mentions some things in his story that can still be used as wealth indicators today. Let's take a look. Solid gold casket containing a spoon, fork, and knife of fine gold with set diamonds and rubies. We can all say that that sounds pretty rich. He goes on to say, the prince made his way into a great courtyard paved with marble, and a chamber which was decked over with gold. Now, that sounds pretty wealthy to me. I don't know what your house is decked with, but mine is not decked with gold. Something that Perrault mentioned was looking glass. I have a lot of looking glass in my house, but I'm pretty sure I'm not as wealthy as this ogress was. And if you read Charles Perrault's story, it said the king had only married her for her wealth. So time and time again, he showed how wealthy this family was. Does the true love kiss have to be a kiss? In fairy tales, the true love's kiss breaks the spell or brings emancipation. If it is not the true love, then your kiss won't work. In The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods by Charles Perrault, we saw other things that signifies a true love's kiss. And in this paragraph, Charles Perrault showed us a different version of a true love's kiss. Hardly had he taken a step towards the wood when the tall trees, the brambles and the thorns, separated of themselves and made a path for him. He turned in the direction of the castle and espied it at the end of a long avenue. This avenue he entered, and was surprised to notice that the trees closed up again as soon as he passed, so that none of his retinue were able to follow him. So this paragraph had no physical kiss in it. There was no lips locking. There was no physical contact between the prince and the princess. But this part of the story showed us that the bushes opened up for the prince. And then when he went through, they closed right behind him. So this was a path only the true love could walk. There was no one else who could walk this path to get up there. So this was showing you that it's another version of a true love's kiss. The true love's kiss is to bring emancipation or to break the curse. But how can you break the curse without getting up there? And to get up there, you have to be the true love. So there's many different things that factors in, or many different things that can be, quote unquote, a true love's kiss. So let's jump into the age of our main characters, the prince and the princess. And the age they got married, would it be acceptable today? The princess was 15 or 16. Perrault mentioned that the princess got pricked by the spindle 15 or 16 years after the christening. And the prince was a minimum of the age 21. So with the princess being either 15 or 16 years old, do you think it's okay for the prince to have kissed the sleeping beauty, or to get married to the sleeping beauty, or even let the princess have kids for him? Well, in today's society, people say no. But in 1697, that was okay. That was a norm, even though she was 15 or 16. And then the prince was at a minimum age 21. Because back then, you can't get married. The prince can't get married before the age 21. He could have been older, but we're going to go with the minimum age and say that the prince was 21 and the princess was 16 years of age. So most times in fairy tales we see some type of punishment. Sometimes we see none. And sometimes we see half the wrongdoers get punished and the other half get off scotch-free. Well, in Charles Perrault, The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods, we saw two evildoers, but only one really got punished, and that was the mother-in-law. The evil fairy, she went off. In the end, the mother-in-law committed suicide, and that was her punishment. I want to thank you guys all for listening to my presentation on The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods by Charles Perrault. You can go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe below.